All righty. Are we there?
You're there.
All right. So let's go ahead and get going then. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in today. Our topic for today is the prescription process, and you may have overheard me talking with Lorraine just a few moments ago. A lot of times, some of the issues that come up for our vendors, problems and such, could be prevented by having a close communication, working relationship with the pharmacy and the pharmacists there. So that's what we're going to talk about today. I think pharmacists, by and large, people are not quite sure what we do. They go into a pharmacy, they see somebody standing behind a counter, and from there it becomes kind of a black box. But the filling the prescription is just a small part of what your pharmacist can do for you. In fact, a lot of the filling stuff is handled by pharmacy technicians who do that for us, and then we of course check, make sure that everything's okay. So what I really wanted to do today was be able to share with you how you can effectively use both your pharmacy and your pharmacist. So some of the things that we really want to talk about is, who is your pharmacist? Who are these people that you're getting your prescriptions from? And a little bit about the background of how pharmacists are trained. Because again, it's much more than just putting pills into a bottle. We're trained in a lot of different areas to help with both health issues and wellness issues. In fact, some pharmacies you'll see advertised today are advertised as a health and wellness center so that they can help you with preventive things and not only filling your prescriptions. We're going to talk a little bit about different kinds of pharmacies. There are different practice settings for pharmacists, and how might you be interacting with those. Then I'm going to show you the actual process of how a prescription is filled. I think that'll give you better information, not only for your consumers, but also for you, so that you understand what's going on in that black box behind the counter. I wanted to talk with you a little about choosing a pharmacy, because I think that's very important. Pharmacies meet different needs with different settings. There's chain pharmacies, there's independent pharmacies, there are what we call closed door pharmacies that prepare, for instance, bubble packs for our consumers. There are different practice settings. And when you are ready to pick a pharmacy, you want to pick one that meets not only your needs, but also some of the personality things. Maybe you don't like to go pick up medications, you want them sent to your house or whatever. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And then finally, a little bit more about becoming a better partner in your own healthcare or in the healthcare of the consumers that you're caring for. So a little bit about consumers and why they're a little bit different than you are or I might be in terms of choosing or using a pharmacy. It's important to remember that consumers have rights when it comes to their medications. In fact, these medications, when they're dispensed to them, they are actually the property of the consumers. So there are some things that come into play with that in terms of what you can do with their prescriptions and those kinds of things. So it's important to remember that they have rights. And then consumers, unless they're conserved, unless there's some thing in place, regulatory thing in place that says somebody has to manage their medications, they can actually take responsibility for the processes associated with their medications. When you help consumers, for instance, with their medications, it's actually assisting them to administer their medications. You're not actually administering the medications, but you're assisting the consumer in doing that. And so you as a caregiver and the consumer really need to think of yourself as a team so that we can get the best outcomes and the fewest negative outcomes from medication therapy. And then the pharmacists are really a part of the team that helps you take care of consumers. One of the things I frequently see, for instance, is when we have an incident, a special incident report, SIR, related to medications. When I see these, very often people at the site where the consumer is staying will have called the pharmacy and spoken to a pharmacist and gotten help with what to do with that particular event or error that's happened. So you need to see the pharmacist as a part of your healthcare team, helping you to take care of the consumers. And certainly I, as the consultant for VMRC, am available to help with medication-related issues for our consumers. And generally, the way you can get to me is you can email me, of course. Many of you have my email, pharmacist@vmrc.net, but the easier thing to do is to work through your service coordinator. If there's an issue, then you can get a hold of the service coordinator, who can then email me from within the system, and we can get back to you. A good example of this, for instance, how you might use this, sometimes consumers have difficulty swallowing medications. Actually, many of us have trouble swallowing medications. And sometimes I will get an event report where the consumer is just really struggling with this, and the service coordinator will ask me if there's something else that we can do. And often there is. For many of the medications that we give our consumers, for instance, there may be liquid or suspension formulations that are easier to take. So either speaking to the pharmacist where the prescription is filled, or working through the service coordinator to contact me, we can help you with those kinds of issues. Finally, I think knowing how this process works, kind of seeing the inner workings of it, will help you take care of your consumers. So I wanted to talk with you a little about the training of pharmacists. I think unlike other healthcare professionals, whether it's nursing, medicine, dentistry, or whatever, I think pharmacy education is probably something that people don't think a lot about, because there are a lot fewer of us than there are many of the other healthcare providers around us. So in terms of educational requirements, pharmacists have to do undergraduate training. That's regular college. Now, to get into pharmacy school, where you're going to earn the Doctor of Pharmacy degree, the minimum requirement is 2 years of pre-pharmacy in a college. But today, with competition to get into schools, et cetera, many pharmacists, such as me, have a bachelor's degree already before we get to pharmacy school. Once you're in pharmacy school, you're working on the entry-level degree, which is what we call the Doctor of Pharmacy degree. It's a professional doctorate, and the curriculum is very broad. It's not just chemistry. I had a nurse tell me at the hospital this week that she had considered pharmacy, but she just didn't want to take all the chemistry. Well, in fact, people think pharmacists do take boatloads of chemistry, which we did in my generation. Today, it's much less than it was in the past. And so we take, obviously, things in the biological and other healthcare sciences. Now, once you graduate from pharmacy school, then you, like all other healthcare professions, you have to sit for a board exam. In our case, it's the Board of Pharmacy exam. It's a national licensing exam that has to be passed. If you don't pass it, you can't practice, and all that education means nothing. So once you become licensed, then you're fully able to practice pharmacy. Many pharmacists will go on after getting the Doctor of Pharmacy degree and do postgraduate training, and those are residencies and fellowships. And some, for instance, in my case, I actually went on to graduate school in a different program after my training in pharmacy. So many pharmacists, particularly those who are what we call clinical pharmacists, those who are working directly with patients and managing medication therapy and such, will have that postgraduate training. So you can see it's quite a few years of college and graduate school involved in getting licensed to practice. So as I said, the pharmacists are trained in a broad array of topics. Obviously, medications are where we focus. That is what we bring to the healthcare team. We like to think of ourselves as experts in the use of medications to treat diseases. That would be in the area of pharmacology and therapeutics. But in order to understand those topics, you really need some basic science courses in biochemistry, molecular biology, medicinal chemistry, et cetera. And so you spend the first roughly 2/3 of your post college education pharmacy school, roughly about 2/3 of it is in the classroom with didactic stuff, and then 1/3 or more may actually be out in what we call clinical experiences. In other words, you're in the hospital working with the healthcare team, you're in the outpatient clinics, or you're in a pharmacy working with patients in an outpatient pharmacy, for instance, a chain pharmacy or something along those lines. So you have to have roughly 1 year of what we call these experiential clerkships, working directly with patients in order to graduate and get a license to practice. So pharmacy, unlike what many people think based on just picking up their prescriptions, pharmacy is actually a patient care profession with that kind of an emphasis. So what are your pharmacists trained to do? Again, most of us relate to picking up our prescriptions, or if you're in a hospital, for instance, I'm a hospital pharmacist, you may not see me, although I do go to the wards and I do interact with patients in my setting. If you go into a larger general medical setting, you may or may not see your pharmacist. We operate sometimes in the background. But in general, there are a number of things we can do. What we call fulfillment means getting the right drug to the right patient at the right time. So that's filling your prescription. If it's in the hospital, it's making sure that the medications that you need as a patient are there for you. But we're able to do a number of other things. Obviously, we can counsel patients not only on medications that they're taking, but also health and wellness. And we do have training in disease management and things that can help us to talk with you about what would be the approach, for instance, to treating high blood pressure or whatever. Now, another thing you've probably become aware of, especially in this era of the COVID pandemic, is that pharmacies are a good place to get your immunizations. Pharmacists are trained in not only giving the immunizations, but what immunizations are required for different people at different stages of their life. Or for instance, today, many pharmacies are starting to roll out their influenza vaccines, which, by the way, I highly encourage you to get, because during this period of COVID, influenza may actually turn out to also be an important infection that you can pick up. So you want to get your flu shot. Many pharmacies are rolling that out. Also, pharmacies now are great sites to go and get your COVID vaccines. Most all pharmacies have the COVID vaccine or are able to get it. Other things that we do in a pharmacy that you might go to, an outpatient pharmacy, is we're able to help you select among the non-prescription or over-the-counter OTC medications. I was in a Walmart pharmacy a couple of nights ago, and I was just so impressed with the full array of all of the non-prescription things they have, all of the alternative medications like vitamins and other kinds of alternative sorts of medications that you can buy without a prescription. And to be totally honest with you, it's easy to get overwhelmed with how much of that stuff they have out there. What are you going to use this for? What are you going to use that for? So a good place to start is to find a pharmacy where you can actually speak to the pharmacist and tell them what your issue is and what would be my non-prescription options for that, and then how do I use them correctly. Just because something is sold without a prescription does not mean one, that it's not effective, and two, that it doesn't have side effects. So those are things you can find out from your pharmacist. Another type of pharmacy is called a compounding pharmacy. And what compounding means is actually mixing and making formulations of medications. Most of what we use today are pre-made by pharmaceutical companies, but there are some things that patients need and physicians wish to prescribe that are not available, and they need to be made by the pharmacist. There are various types of creams and ointments and hormonal preparations and things, and these are made by pharmacies that have training and the ability to do compounding. Another area that pharmacies are involved in is with screenings. You can go into many pharmacies now, have your blood pressure taken. You can also, in some pharmacies, there are some point of care tests. You know, they might be able to check your blood glucose if you have diabetes or things like that. So we do a lot of screenings. And finally, as the pharmacy profession has advanced, many pharmacists are now directly involved in patient care. We call that disease state management or medication therapy management, where pharmacists are actually managing that drug therapy under protocol, working with prescribers, but pharmacists are managing that therapy. At my hospital, which is St. Joseph's Medical Center, pharmacists manage things like insulin therapy, anticoagulant therapy, and some other things under protocol. And so we're directly managing these things for many patients. In California, a few years ago, State Bill 493 was passed. I think it's Senate bill that allows pharmacists to directly provide certain classes of medications to the patient. It requires that you have extra training in order to be able to do that, so that you're qualified. But things such as hormonal contraceptions, medications that the CDC requires for travel, and under protocol, you can independently furnish these things to patients. And so many pharmacists are now stepping up to the plate, becoming what we call advanced practice pharmacists in order to do these kinds of things. As I already said, pharmacists are giving vaccines. And as long as you are in consultation with the person's provider, like primary care provider, you can order some laboratory things that would be needed to monitor drug therapy in some of these, for some of these patients. So again, these are people who are now called advanced practice pharmacists. Now, another thing that pharmacists can do is we can actually become specialists in certain areas. And there are several ways that you can do that. The Board of Pharmacy Specialties has several different areas. I'm board certified in what's called pharmacotherapy. And it means that you have to have a certain level of training and a certain number of years of experience, and you have to sit for board exams and pass those. And then you have to recertify periodically to show that you're keeping up in your area. So you'll find that some of the pharmacists that you interact with are board certified specialists in different areas. Now, there are different kinds of pharmacies that you're going to come into contact with, whether it's for yourself or when you're caring for consumers. The most numerically, the largest number of pharmacies are what we call community pharmacies. Community pharmacies come in different types. There are chain pharmacies. There are what we call independent pharmacies that are small, often owned by one pharmacist owner. And those are where you generally are getting your prescriptions filled. There are hospital pharmacies. Every hospital has a pharmacy, pretty much. And in my situation, I am a hospital pharmacist. And so we're the ones who work with the medical staff to determine the list of medications that we're going to keep for them to use, and protocols for the use of those medications, and those kinds of things. You may not see your hospital pharmacist, although more and more clinical pharmacists from the pharmacy are getting up into the wards to be able to work in a team setting with physicians and other nurses and other healthcare providers in the patient care setting. So it's very likely that at some point you may actually see a hospital pharmacist. Long-term care facilities also are places where pharmacists practice. In fact, there are regulatory requirements that pharmacists review the medication profiles of people in long-term care facilities, and have overview of the medications. Are they being used appropriately? Do we need to make some changes or whatever, in consultation with persons, prescribers? But that's a regulatory requirement. And then there are closed door pharmacies. Those are pharmacies where you don't go to get a prescription, but they take care of places like long-term care facilities, or many people within the VMRC consumer population get their medications from a pharmacy that doesn't service the general public, but they do service people who are in facilities. And so many of you are interacting with what we call a closed door pharmacy. And then there are a fewer number, but there are pharmacies that are compounding medications, like I said. Some are specifically for that. In Stockton, we have one in particular in Lincoln Center that is a strictly compounding pharmacy. But then we also have pharmacists, mostly in the independent pharmacy area, who also do compounding. And so you might find yourself coming into contact with that type of pharmacist also. So as I said, most of us are getting our prescriptions filled at retail pharmacies. And broadly speaking, there are two groups of these. One is what we call an independent pharmacy. That doesn't mean that there's just one, but usually it means that it's not a corporate type of thing, that there's a independent pharmacist owner who or owners that may own more than one pharmacy, but usually it's smaller in number. And they often are able to provide specialized services. It's a part of their business model. For instance, maybe they provide durable medical equipment, maybe they do some compounding or whatever, but those are generally, it's not a large group under the same umbrella. Chain pharmacies are probably what you see more of than you do independent pharmacies, and these are generally owned by large corporations. So examples would be Walmart, Walgreens, CVS, Rite Aid, in our area, Raley's. So generally these are corporate businesses and large numbers of stores, and it can be, huge numbers in the case of stores, chain stores like Walgreens. And so there are advantages to that. So for instance, if you get your prescriptions at one of these chain stores, they have your data on profile. And let's say you travel out of the state, and in traveling, you forgot to take your prescription with you, or you lose it or something like that. If there's one of these pharmacies, let's say that it is a Walgreens pharmacy, and you get your prescriptions here at Walgreens in Stockton, and then you go off to Orlando, Florida, and you forgot your medication, you can go into a Walgreens there and they can look up your profile and generally do something to help you out there. Whereas if you're getting it from an independent pharmacy, it's a little bit more difficult to do that. It can be done, but it's a little bit more of a challenge to do that. And the number of services that chain pharmacies provide depends upon the chain itself. You may have seen some commercials recently on television where one of the larger chains now is opening up more of a wellness center. It's not just about dispensing prescription medications, so it's more of a wellness center that includes counseling on alternative medications and all kinds of things like that. So the number of services that you get will vary depending on which chain that you're going to. So again, picking a pharmacy in terms of independent versus chain is really your personal preference. But there are some things I would encourage you, no matter which type of pharmacy you're looking at, there are some things I think that are important. One is you need to be able to talk to the pharmacist. In pharmacies like that, we have clerks, we have pharmacy technicians, and then we have a pharmacist. Obviously, the pharmacist is the one that's going to talk to you about the therapeutics of the medications you're taking, potential side effects, provide counseling, and those kinds of things. So for me, one really important thing is that I can talk to the pharmacist. And I can tell you the other night, I was in another pharmacy and I wanted to see the pharmacist, and I wasn't able to do so. And I found that a little bit distressing, probably since he went to my pharmacy school. But anyway, for me, my relationship with my pharmacist is a really important issue. And if I can't talk to him or her, that doesn't make me very happy. Other things you might be looking for would be things like the ability to sync your medications so that you get all your prescriptions within a short period of time each month, rather than piecemeal every other week or so. So those are the kind of things you need to think about when you're looking at picking a pharmacy. A lot of it is personal, and we all have different priorities, but I just encourage you to look at those kinds of things. Now, again, I've already spoken about compounding pharmacies. The thing about compounding pharmacy now is that people are having to be really, really, I think, highly trained in order to do that, because when we compound medications, there's another number of things that can happen and can go wrong in doing that. So you want to pick a compounding pharmacy that's got pharmacists who've been specifically trained in that area and have a good track record, and are really knowledgeable about what they're doing, can provide the service that you need. Probably one of the biggest areas that compounding pharmacies are involved with right now is hormonal therapy. They make a lot of creams and ointments and formulations that can be taken, suppositories and done in different ways. So that's one big area that compounding pharmacies are involved in. But actually, compounding also refers to any time that we mix up stuff. So for instance, when you go into a hospital and they give you an IV and it's got whatever, normal saline or D5W or whatever, and an antibiotic has been put in there, that is actually a type of compounding, sterile compounding, so that you're not, injecting bacteria into people. So it has to be done in a very specialized setting with equipment that will allow you to make sterile preparations. And so many compounding pharmacies are involved in that area also. Okay, so let's kind of talk for a bit about the prescription process itself. And we'll kind of start from the very beginning. So you go in to see your prescriber, whether it's your physician, your podiatrist, your dentist, whoever has the authority to write a prescription. You go in, the prescriber assesses you and makes a diagnosis. Based on that diagnosis, the prescriber will have usually several different options for treatment. Let's take blood pressure, for instance. If you have hypertension or high blood pressure, we have a whole large number of classes of medications that we can use to treat high blood pressure. So your prescriber will think about your particular problem, also other things that you have going on with your healthcare state. Do you have other diseases? Are you taking other medications that could interact with this one or whatever? All of that kind of goes into the prescriber's thought processes. And out of that, and based on treatment guidelines, now we have a lot of national treatment guidelines that try to help us understand the approaches that have the largest level of evidence to support effectiveness and safety. That's what is all going into the decision-making process of your prescriber. As you're sitting there in the exam room, your prescriber is thinking about this. He knows your medical history, all the medications you're taking, and these sorts of things. And then he or she will determine what would be hopefully the optimal prescription for you. And then the prescription is written. And here, written doesn't really mean always writing on a piece of paper. It may, but we're moving more towards electronic prescriptions today, where the physician actually will enter the prescription either like in an iPad or a computer or whatever, and it's sent over directly to the pharmacy. You're going to see in the next few years, you're going to see us moving away from written prescriptions. Everybody knows that different people have poor handwriting. And I can tell you as a pharmacist, I'm pretty good at reading poor handwriting, but when it's really poor, that's something that can lead to errors because you try to make an interpretation and you're in a hurry or whatever. So we're moving away from that. You're going to see much more of an emphasis on electronic prescriptions, but today you can still get written ones. The prescription then ends up at a pharmacy. Now, it's also possible that some of your consumers, or you maybe, are being serviced by what we call a mail order pharmacy. And generally that's a type of closed door pharmacy where they have this large facility. A good example might be Kaiser. Kaiser has large facilities where prescriptions are sent and they go and then they prepare them for you and then they mail them to you. And a lot of times they're providing even incentives for you to do that. Instead of paying one copay and get one 30-day supply of medication, sometimes a healthcare organization like that or an insurer will encourage you to use mail order pharmacy by giving you either a lower copayment or you can have more days of coverage with the same copayment. So that's what a mail order pharmacy is all about. But the thing is that the prescription ends up at the pharmacy. The pharmacist, in conjunction with pharmacy technicians, they fill the prescription. It's checked. The pharmacist analyzes it for any potential drug interactions with your other medications. And then it's determined that it's been filled correctly and it's ready to go to the patient. And by the way, another reason why I suggest you pick whatever pharmacy you want to pick, choose it, and then stay with them, because that's the only way all of your medications are going to be on one profile. If you go to 2 or 3 different pharmacies, none of them is going to have the complete medication profile, and they won't be able to do a complete check for drug-drug and drug-disease interactions. So that's an important thing. I'd like to suggest that you have one pharmacy, no matter what you pick, and then have all your prescriptions done there. And then, so we dispense the medication to the patient. We provide counseling on how to use it, what to look for in terms of side effects, what it's going to do for you positively. And then the patient becomes responsible then for using the medication in the appropriate way. So again, back to this idea of how do we choose among the literally thousands of medications that are available today. It starts with what disease you have, and that sets the array of possibilities. What drugs are approved for this? And what I mean by that is the FDA reviews the clinical trial data during drug development. Those trial data are then sent to the FDA, it's reviewed, and then a decision is made. Now, you probably all heard recently about the FDA reviewing the COVID vaccines. Just last week, I believe it was on Friday, the FDA Committee on Vaccines, I guess it was, met to look at, I think it was the Pfizer vaccine in terms of should we be taking boosters, et cetera. That's what I mean by FDA approval process. And so we think about, for this disease, what medications are approved for this, and then we use what we call evidence-based guidelines. A lot of times when we give medications to patients, it's based on our clinical experience in using these medications in a large number of our patients, and we have experience with it, and we kind of know what it's going to do. But there's a bigger emphasis today on what we call evidence-based guidelines, and these are where they've taken a lot of clinical trial data, and they've tried to find comparisons between different drugs for this disorder, and they look at that stuff and they try to come up with what would be like our first line or most recommended medication to treat this disorder. And so more and more, we're using these evidence-based guidelines in the decision-making process. You then look at the patient and you think about specific factors for this patient: age, kidney function, liver function, ability to tolerate certain drugs. Do they have a history of allergy to certain medications? So we start looking at things about you that then might modify and make this drug really a good possibility, and this one maybe not so much a good possibility. And then we think about potential downside of side effects. So for instance, in certain patients, we might want to avoid, well, let's say we give them a drug that can cause constipation. If we already have a person who has a problem with constipation, maybe we won't give them this drug that has a high incidence of constipation as a side effect. And then there's some other things about your ability or our ability to adhere to the treatment plan. So for instance, if I have two medications for the same disease and they're both equally effective, one is given once a day, one is given 4 times a day, I'm more likely to give you the once a day medication because it's easier to adhere to that regimen than having to take it 4 times a day. So we look at that and we say, okay, with all of this considered, then which medications do we want to prescribe? Now, you and I both know that we go to our prescribers and we're in the exam room for a short period of time, and it doesn't seem like it takes them very long to arrive at the decision. Well, that's because of their experience and knowledge. They're able to think through these. They've treated a lot of people like us, and so they can actually move through this process fairly quickly. So I thought what I'd like to do is I'd like to show this video of how a prescription is filled so that you can kind of get an idea what's going on the other side of that big counter that you see when you come to the pharmacy. So let's get out of here and let's go over to this, and we will take a look at filling a prescription.
Hey, how are you doing? Welcome to Medicine Mart.
Hey, good.
What
How
can I
are
do
you?
for you?
I need to get these prescriptions filled for my son.
Has he ever been here before?
No, he's never been here before.
Okay, I'm gonna need to get you to fill this out for me.
Okay. Well, how long is this all going to take?
Probably about 10 or 15 minutes.
Why so long? All you have to do is stick some pills in the bottle, right?
Tell you what, why don't we get you to come back here and we'll show you exactly what it takes.
Okay.
Patient, I'm adding the last name, first name, the address. Never know him to come get you. Phone number for the patient. His brother. And date of birth. And then we're going to add the insurance information. Yes, sir. All right, and now we'll put the prescription in. All right, I'm going to enter the prescriptions. The first one is amoxicillin suspension. It's 400 milligrams for 5 milliliters, 75 milliliters, 1 teaspoon by mouth every 12 hours. All right. Second one is Flonase, 16 gram vial. It's going to be 1 spray in each nostril twice a day as needed. And then the last one, the third one, will be ibuprofen. 4 grams. You will take 1 tablet 3 times a day as needed for pain. All right. Simple insurance. Rejected. We're going to call the insurance company. Okay, we just got done off phone with the insurance company. We've got them to go through. I need all 3 labels. I'm going to pull the drugs. Right. We're going to put the Flonase label on the Flonase. Label on your amoxicillin. There are worse places you could have gone already. We have enough. Mix the amoxicillin. That's really good, and we're good. Okay.
Or did your doctor go over the medicines with you, tell you what they were for?
He told me a little bit, but not really a lot. I don't really remember a lot of what he said.
Good. Let's go over this with you and help you out, make sure that Cocky gets
Okay.
feeling better.
All right.
This is an antibiotic called amoxicillin.
Mhm.
It needs to be taken 1 teaspoonful every 12 hours.
Okay.
You do need to keep it in the refrigerator, and you do need to shake it up real well each time. But most importantly, make sure and finish all of the medication.
Okay.
Keep it in the refrigerator and finish it all.
It's gonna taste good. It's gonna
Oh yeah, it's got a bubblegum flavor, and you'll love it. You'll be feeling better in just a few days.
Okay, good.
This right here is a nose spray to help with the congestion. It's called Flonase. Fluticasone is the generic name. And we use one spray at each nostril once a day. It's really important to blow your nose beforehand and clear your nostrils so that the spray can get all the way in there.
Okay. Yeah, it's been a little stuffy, so.
Hope that'll help. The last medicine we got here is ibuprofen. Ibuprofen is an anti-inflammatory drug, and this will help with the pain and inflammation. It's 1 tablet 3 to 4 times a day as needed, and you need to take it with some food.
Okay.
Take any other aspirin, Advil, or leave along with it, just Tylenol.
Just like after breakfast or something like that.
After breakfast, after dinner, after supper, like up to 3 times a day.
All right, I think we can handle that.
Any questions?
I think that's gonna be it. Thank you for your help today.
Thank you. Hope Cocky feels better.
Thank
Come in
you.
and see us.
You will.
Okay, let me just mention a couple of things there from what you saw in that video. First off, you notice that the pharmacy technician actually filled the prescriptions. I can't say enough about good pharmacy technicians. They make my life so much better. And that guy looked pretty confident. And then the pharmacist comes in and reviews the what has been prescribed. But also, I wanted to let you know that when we input those medications into the computer system, the computer is able to look at your medication profile. It will alert us if there is something like a drug interaction or if there's a history of an allergy, for instance, the amoxicillin there. Many people say they have a penicillin allergy, and that needs to be assessed. And so just because there's an drug interaction does not mean that you can't take the medication. It just means that we might have to monitor it a little bit more closely. The point I want to make is there's much more going on there than just that pharmacist initially what the tech had done. He's already reviewed the patient's profile, allergies, potential interactions, and those kinds of things. So that's essentially the process. Now, 10 to 15 minutes, I was surprised that she was upset with 10 to 15 minutes. That's actually pretty fast, especially in a really busy pharmacy. It takes some time to put all these things together. So what do you expect then from your pharmacist? What are you looking for when you're picking a pharmacist or in a pharmacy? You want to obviously make sure they fill your prescriptions accurately. Today, we have a lot of checks and balances. So for instance, the technician took the prescription from the patient and then selected the medications. You notice that those medications were still sitting out there when the pharmacist checked the prescriptions. We always compare what is sitting there in the bottle to what is actually in the prescription vial. So we have a lot of checks and balances to make sure that it's done accurately. Your pharmacist now will review your profile, look for drug interactions or allergies. Also, you heard them interfacing with the insurance. One of the things I want to make sure you understand is that your pharmacist is not determining what is going to be covered for you. That is your insurance company. We, unfortunately, are the ones that have to tell you when the insurance company is not going to pay for it, or it's one of those medications that's in a high tier for copays and you're going to pay more than you really want to do. So you can always work with your pharmacist because some medications may not be covered by your insurance plan, but there's another one just like it that is. So you can work with your pharmacist on those insurance issues when coverage becomes an issue. As you saw, the pharmacist then counsels the patient on how to use the medications. How do you take it appropriately so you get the maximal benefit out of it? Storage is another issue. We talked about that in our modules, Medication Basics 1 and 2. We talked about proper storage. And then also counseling on the treatment that you're getting. You heard him talk about why ibuprofen, because the condition that her son has, it was either like a otitis, which is an ear infection, or upper respiratory bronchitis, but there's inflammation and some pain. And so that's why the ibuprofen was being given, and the pharmacist will explain that. And then we always like to tell patients what to monitor, okay? Number one is the disease getting better, whatever it is we're treating? And number two, are we seeing any side effects? And so will generally tell you what to watch for. That would be a flag that you might need to speak to us or to your prescriber. So other things that your pharmacist can help you with, as I said before, screenings. Pharmacies now are places where you can go and have your blood pressure checked. In some cases, you can even have, oh, go away. Sorry, I get this automatic thing all the time. So let's go back here. Okay. Health screening and health monitoring. For instance, if you are being treated for high blood pressure, then you can get your blood pressure monitored during treatment. We can help you with adhering to treatment. So for instance, let's say you got a prescription for a tablet that's just too big for you to swallow. We can help. We can either get it changed. There's some tablets that can be crushed and put in applesauce or whatever. As I said, we can set up refill plans for you, help with the insurance and those kinds of things. So these are the kind of services that you really want to find in the pharmacy that you choose. Now, I did want to mention a little bit more about the face-to-face or mail order pharmacy issue. Most of us now who have insurance for prescriptions often have the option of having our medications mailed to us from a mail order pharmacy, where the prescription is sent there. Then from that point on, you can go online, enter that you need a refill, etc. Which actually today you can do at almost any pharmacy. They all have websites, and you can just go online if you want to set up a refill. But typically that's what you would do for a mail order pharmacy. And the face-to-face or retail, whether it's a chain or independent community pharmacy, some of the advantages there is you have direct face-to-face contact. I personally like to talk to my pharmacist. Actually, he was one of my students from many years ago, so I do enjoy seeing him. But you develop relationships where the pharmacist knows you, knows some of your characteristics, knows your family. You go to the pharmacy, you can purchase other things. So maybe you're treated with an antibiotic for something, but you want to get an OTC product, maybe for the pain manager or something. The pharmacist can help you with that. And very often in those pharmacies, you can get your medications the same day, whereas if it goes to a mail order pharmacy, obviously there is a delivery issue. Those timeframes are getting shorter and shorter, particularly as some of the larger mega suppliers are going into the prescription business, and they have their like one-day delivery service. That timeframe is actually shrinking. There's some downsides to going face-to-face. Obviously, you have to go to the pharmacy, and sometimes that's not convenient. There can be privacy issues. Most pharmacies have an area where the pharmacist can talk to you in a quiet and non-public sort of way, because none of us want our health problems advertised to the entire world. Sometimes wait times can be very long when you go face-to-face. If the pharmacy has 100 prescriptions waiting to be filled, that's going to take some time. In terms of the mail order, again, convenience, automatic refill schedules. You can do telephone consults with the pharmacist. I prefer face-to-face, but you can do telephone consults, online ordering, and those kinds of things. The biggest downside, I think, is you can't get your medications on the same day, and you have to order your refills in advance. So those are all things you have to take into consideration. I have no issues with people who choose face-to-face or people who choose mail order, as long as it fits in with what you see are priorities in getting your prescriptions. So again, these are the kinds of things that you think about. Now with our consumers, you may or may not have anything to do with their choosing pharmacies. But as a vendor, you can help them. If they have a problem with a pharmacy, and it's an ongoing problem, then maybe you want to think about another one, those kinds of things. But these are the kinds of things that come into play. Let's talk about insurance benefits, because this is something that I think people sometimes get confused about. They are really variable. Different insurance companies will have different lists of medications that they are willing to cover, whether it's Medi-Cal, which is our Medicaid provider, and they have their own formulary of medications that are covered, and then there's a lot of medications that may not be covered. So it depends on the insurance that you have, and they all have these differences. And the pharmacy doesn't really have anything to do with this. So if you bring me a prescription for drug X and we input it into the system, most often now we don't call insurance companies like they did in that video. That's almost never done. It's done online. When we input the prescription, the computer knows who your insurance company is, and that information goes over there, and it comes back that we can fill it or we can't fill it, or we can fill it, but it's a higher copay. That's driven by the insurance company. And they often have incentives for using lower cost medications. Obviously, they're trying to minimize the amount of money that they have to put out on prescriptions. So they have sometimes tiered systems where the copay changes depending on the cost of the medication, et cetera. But my point is, that is between you and the insurance company and the benefits that they provide. Now, can we help you? Yes, we can, because we can find generally a medication that your insurance company will pay for, and then we can request to your prescriber maybe that they change to this medication so that you can get it covered. So this is something that you can work on with your pharmacist. But just remember, we're there to help you. We're not making a lot of those decisions about what you can and can't have. What we can't do, or can and can't do, we can help find out if something's covered. It's pretty easy for us to do an input and tell you, yes, it's covered. Here's what your copay is going to be. If it's not covered, then sometimes insurance companies will accept what's called a prior authorization. And that takes some time. They review the reason the medication is being given, and does that rise to the level where they want to cover it. So we can help often with prior authorizations. We can help you select alternatives that might be covered. We can't override your pharmacy benefit manager's formulary, but we can work with them. We can't adjust your copay. We can't give you a medication for free. Remember, pharmacies are businesses and they're paying everybody involved. And so medications are not going to be free unless you have no copay from your insurance company. We can't bill for one thing and give you another because that's fraud. So how can you become a better partner then in your healthcare, or a better partner in helping to care for the consumers at your site? Well, you want to understand your own health issues or those of the consumer. And what problems do I have? How do they interact with each other? Those kinds of things. You should know why you're taking each of your medications. Sometimes I do work with people who are not quite sure why they're taking a certain medication. We can provide counseling about that. You should be proactive in asking, what is this for? If you didn't understand when the prescriber wrote it, you can certainly ask when you get to the pharmacy. You should be involved in watching your own health status. How am I feeling? You can even, if you have high blood pressure that's difficult to manage, you can even get a blood pressure cuff at home and take your blood pressure and then let your provider know what that is. You need to make sure you're taking non-prescription medications appropriately, always remembering that these are medications and they can interact with your prescription medications. So be a wise consumer on non-prescription medications. Always try to take the medications as you're directed by the prescriber and the pharmacist and what's on the bottle. And then you can be involved as a part of the team in your care in providing, developing a care plan for whatever the disorder is. So how can you know more about your medical problems? Well, obviously we have a wealth of information available to us today in the age of computers and online information. The problem is it can be hard to differentiate between good information and stuff that's not really very good. It shows up on the internet, and you want to avoid thinking that everything that comes up on the internet is correct information. So what I've done here is I've given you a site that I trust a lot, the Mayo Clinic, obviously. So let me show you that. So this is the Mayo Clinic site. Mayo Clinic, you've heard of it probably, is an outstanding healthcare system. And you can come here and you can actually find, like, if you want to look up a disease, you can find they have all kinds of things. I have a friend who has atrial fibrillation, for instance, excuse me. So he could come here and find out about atrial fibrillation or anything like that. So this is a really good site to come to look up your disease, see what it is, and see how it is normally managed. So as a consumer now, as a person who's being treated and getting a prescription, what should you expect to know when you get your prescription, either from the prescriber or from your pharmacy? What is it? What is it for? What's it going to do? You saw the pharmacist in the video explaining all three medications. The antibiotic was for the infection. The fluticasone nasal spray was to reduce the inflammation and hopefully make breathing easier. The ibuprofen was to help with the inflammation, but also to provide some pain relief. How should I take it? How long should I take it? Most antibiotics, for instance, are taken for a few days, maybe up to 10 to 14 days for some of these things like ear infections and respiratory infections. So you want to know how long it is. You notice that the pharmacist told her, you're supposed to take that whole bottle, or the son is supposed to take the whole bottle of amoxicillin. That's because the bottle has enough for 10 days, and it's a 10-day course of therapy. So know how much to take and when to stop. And then you should know what effects. Well, what are the benefits of taking this? What's going to cure my infection and make me feel better? What are the side effects? Well, amoxicillin, it can cause a rash in some patients. It can cause diarrhea in some patients, GI upset, those kinds of things. These are the kind of questions you want to ask and know when you get your prescription. Now, you can help your prescribers. Most of us have probably more than one prescriber because today we're often sent to specialists for specific kinds of conditions. You may have a general practitioner or a primary care provider, family doctor, who may send you to another doctor. Maybe it's a lung doctor, maybe it's an orthopedic surgeon or whatever, but they send you to these different physicians. One of the things I always recommend to my patients is you should have a current list of your medications to take to your prescriber's office with you. I used to see one prescriber, and while I was waiting in the waiting room, there was a big sign in the reception area that said, make sure you bring all your prescriptions in so the doctor can review all of them. This is really important because I was seeing a cardiologist, but it's important that he knows all of the non-cardiology medications that I might be taking because they can impact cardiovascular function. They can interact with medications that he might have wanted to use. And I would put on your list who has prescribed what. Now, this is really important for our consumers. When the service coordinators send me their list of medications, I like to actually get a copy of the annual review summary, because then it tells me who's prescribing what other conditions does this patient have. Those kinds of things are really helpful to me in helping to solve problems that may have come up. And so another thing I like to tell patients is, if you're taking a medication and you experience any problems, keep a log of that, jot it down somewhere so that you don't forget about it. And if they're not, really serious problems, but there's something you want to speak to your prescriber about, then you'll have something to take back to the office, or when you do the telemedicine visit, over Zoom or whatever it is, you can tell them what you're experiencing with the medication. So, what do you want to know about your medications? What should you know? And how can you find out information? Now, sometimes patients don't want to know too much information. They want to follow the suggestions and recommendations and advice that us healthcare providers give them. But you can find reputable information. Obviously, textbooks by experts are out there that you can take a look at. Online sites, like I just showed you, the Mayo Clinic online site. I'm going to show you a couple more in just a moment. These typically are fairly unbiased sites where you can get good information. Be very careful about stuff that comes from social media, from sites that are not really by healthcare professionals. And some sites have an obvious bias against even using medications for certain diseases. And if you can't tell who's written the information, then I just usually don't spend much time looking at it. I want to know who's written it, where's it come from? Is this a reputable site? Like I said, with the Mayo Clinic. So let me show you first what I think is a reputable site, and that's Medline Plus. So let me go over there. Oops, here, Medline Plus. Okay, so this, as you can see here, is put out by the U.S. National Library of Medicine. That's obviously a very reputable site. I really like this site, and I recommend it to a lot of my patients because it has so much stuff on health topics, drugs, and supplements. So not only prescription medications and non-prescription medications, but what about those alternative products that are out there? You know, things like GABA, saw palmetto, certain kinds of these alternative medications. So you can actually look them up here. There's just a whole array of information sources on here. So for instance, if you wanted to look up something about a drug, drugs, herbs, and supplements are all on this site. So you can simply either go to the letter or you can type in the search engine up here and find out what is available. So I think if I were you and I were going to find one site where I could find information about my my disorders, my disease, or my medications, my non-prescription drugs, my alternative things like herbs, this is a place that I would definitely bookmark. Now, I wanted to show you something else. As I said, pharmacies have a wide array of non-prescription or over-the-counter medications. In order to use those, you need to know how to read the label. It's important because the reason they're allowed to be non-prescription is that the information that's necessary for a person to use it correctly and limit the possibility of harm is that all those instructions have to be available on the label so that you can actually read it. And I would encourage you to do that because these are medications. They're substances that can affect the body, and you really should be wise about doing that. So let me show you a brief video. This is the one, yeah.
Oh, hey, ever wonder how your mom knows what medicine to give you when you're not feeling well? A lot of mom knowledge and a little but very important thing known as the drug facts label. The drug facts label is on all OTC medicines. OTC stands for over the counter and refers to medicines you buy without a doctor's prescription. The drug facts label can help you choose the right drug for you and your problem, and to help you use the medicine safely. It's on the box or other container your medicine comes in. Here, the active ingredients and purpose of the drug is explained. Things like the medicine's name, what it does, and how much is in each tablet, capsule, or teaspoon. The uses section lists what conditions the drug will treat. There's a warning section that tells you the things you should know before using the medicine, such as when not to take it, when to talk to a doctor first, and how it can make you feel. There's other warnings too, like things you shouldn't do while taking it and when to stop using the medicine and ask a doctor for help. The directions part explains how to safely use the medicine, including how much, how often, and how long you can use it. There are even parts that tell you how to store your medicine when you're not using it and what's in the medicine, besides, well, medicine. Remember, all medicines, even OTC ones, can cause side effects you don't want. So follow the 411 on the drug facts label to avoid an OMG when you take your MED.
For more information, go to fda.gov/medsinmyhome.
Okay, so you can see that was from the Food and Drug Administration, which is obviously a very reputable source. So once again, all non-prescription medications have to have that kind of label on it. Now, just one caveat here though, alternative medications are often not approved in the same way that prescription or other over-the-counter drugs are approved. They're approved as dietary supplements. So many of these alternative medications, these herbal products, actually have not gone through the same approval process that prescription and regular non-prescription medications have. So because they go through that process, the labeling is slightly different. They can't make certain claims like, if you take this fiber product, your cholesterol is going to go down. They say it might be an aid in managing cholesterol, but they can't tell you that this is to treat high cholesterol. So a lot of those alternative herbal products that you see in many stores now, their labeling is slightly different, and the claims that they can make are also fewer. But I would tell you that at this Medline Plus site that you just saw, you can go and you can look it up on there, and you can see all about that herbal or alternative medication product. Now, another site that you can go to for medications is called Daily Meds. And I want to show you this because it does provide slightly different information. So Daily Med, you can type in your medication here, and let's just take an example. Let's say that you are taking Tramadol for pain, okay? So you can look, oops, misspelled, okay, there we go. You have to spell it correctly. All right, so let's take a look at Tramadol. And you can find here this medication. You can look it up, and it has all of this information here that will, and this is a little bit more difficult to read because this is based on the FDA approved package labeling. But there are some things here that you can find very helpful, like the medication guide tells you about the medication, what it's used for, what are some of the common side effects. So Daily Med is another place that I often recommend for some of my patients. In fact, I just recommended that to a friend the other night. Okay, so again, what about dietary supplements? They are regulated by the FDA, but it is not the same regulatory process as you would for prescription medications or regular OTC medications. They don't require the same type of trials to show that they do whatever. So for instance, that label that they showed on that FDA video was chlorpheniramine. That's an antihistamine that's in some over-the-counter medication products. Chlorpheniramine was actually tested and found to be effective in people that have, for instance, hay fever. So that is different than going and getting a bottle of saw palmetto, which is an herbal product and sold on many pharmacy shelves in the alternative medicine area. Saw palmetto is used for guys, for instance, that have large prostates. So they can talk about it's good for prostate health, but they can't tell you is that it's going to shrink your prostate or whatever, because it has not been put into a clinical trial and tested like that. So one of the things I want to encourage you to do with herbal and alternative products is just be a wise consumer. Don't believe everything that you hear. Don't believe everything you look up on the internet. Go to a reputable source, for instance, Medline Plus or some other place that comes from a regulatory body. Look up the information. Many pharmacies now have pharmacists who are trained in this area. They can tell you what the evidence is for these medications and what they'll do for you, what they may not do for you, and those kinds of things. So just be a wise consumer when it comes to all of these dietary supplements. There is another place that you can look at. So let me quickly show you that, because I think it also is another very reputable site. So this is from the National Institutes of Health, NIH. You've heard a lot about them in the last 2 years with COVID. This is a place that you can go and find all kinds of things about health information. And you can, for instance, find supplement fact sheets. So you can go here. And so you can look up whatever it is you happen to be thinking about taking. There's a whole list. You can also do a search. So this is also a very reputable site that I actually, in fact, use also when I want to know about supplements. Because I don't want to downplay supplements. There are some people who get therapeutic benefit from these. And in fact, I do take a supplement, but I've done the research and I know that what I'm taking is safe and probably effective. Again, you have to remember that they are not tested in the same way as prescription medications. Okay, now another thing that is important in using your medications or helping our consumers is what we call treatment adherence. Are you taking the medication in the appropriate way and in proper amounts? Now, let me preface all this by saying we're all human. And occasionally I miss a dose. I forget my blood pressure medication I take at bedtime. Sometimes I get really sleepy watching TV and I cruise on in, go to bed, and I forgot to take my blood pressure medicine. It doesn't happen too often, but it happens. And so you don't have to heap enormous amounts of guilt on yourself or on consumers over treatment non-adherence. Now, the thing about consumers, of course, is by regulation, if they miss doses and things, you have to file an event report and all that stuff that goes with it. But in general, your health is not going to suffer if you miss a dose very, infrequently, but you do miss a dose. So it is a major factor, though, in treating chronic diseases. Many people get their medications and they just don't take them for various reasons. Oftentimes today is because people may or may not have good prescription coverage and they're paying a lot of money. And I know some people will take a medication that they're supposed to take every day and they'll take it every other day because they can only afford that much of it. This is where you need to work with your pharmacist and maybe we can help you, get a less expensive medication or whatever. And by the way, I don't have it on the slides, but there are some programs out there that can help provide low-cost prescription medications. And for instance, there's some medications that there are sources of manufacturers make a certain amount of that available at very low cost or even free for some patients who qualify. And there's a site that you can go to. I should have put it on here. It's called Needy Meds. If you just look in your search engine under Needy Meds, it'll take you to that website. And you can put in the drug name and you can find out if there's one of these programs that provides it at low cost if you meet certain financial criteria. So there are a number of things that come into play about adherence, but we need to work together with our consumers to ensure that they're as adherent as we can possibly have them be. So what are some things that we can do? Well, again, knowing the medications, what they're doing for you in a positive way, knowing what the real instructions are and what do they really mean by 4 times a day. Does that mean every 6 hours or does it mean, 7, noon, 7 and bedtime or whatever? And then identifying the most common reasons that you don't take your medications. Mine happens to be simply forgetting. It's not side effects. It's not, do I think it doesn't work? It doesn't cause side effects. It does work. It's forgetfulness. So what are some things I've done? Well, you can get those little containers that have Monday, Tuesday through Sunday on there and put your medication in there. And obviously, if you have an empty box, you took your medication. So there are things like that. There are bubble packs that we can get for our consumers that each individual dose is in this bubble pack labeled with times and those kinds of things that they can be given. So there are a number of ways of helping people to remember to take their medication. And other things that come into play often with our consumers is they have behavioral issues that arise. And I was working with a consumer last week who simply liked to exert some control over what was going on in her care facility by saying, no, I'm not going to take my medication. Okay, and that's a way of her exerting some control. Another reason that consumers miss medications, in fact, it's one of the more frequent ones, is that the refills are not obtained on time. Now, let me just tell you that when it comes to refills, again, it's not just the pharmacy. Physicians may or may not write prescriptions with refills on them. And if the pharmacy is asked to do a refill without authorization from the prescriber, in many instances, we can't do it. Now, if it's an emergency, yes, and if it's a chronic medication that you're on, but you forgot to request the refill in time, pharmacists are authorized, for instance, for, let's say, blood pressure medications, to give you a refill and then get the authorization from the physician. And that regulation was put in place to try and help with adherence and help people to not miss medication. So you can work with your pharmacist in that situation. But most often, I recommend that for our consumers, you give the pharmacy at least a week's notice that you're going to need the refill. You can use your medication administration record to note on there, no more refills, make sure to call the pharmacy a week in advance or whatever, but giving them plenty of time, because if there's not a refill authorized on that prescription, the pharmacy is going to have to get a hold of the prescriber. And what if they're out of town? What if they're just too busy and they're not paying attention to their faxes? Most often we don't call anymore. They don't want phone calls. They want us to contact them electronically. So for our consumers, it is a big deal to make sure that they get their refills ordered on time. And then if it's a regimen that you can't stick with for whatever reason, I can't swallow these tablets, it's too many times a day, it upsets my stomach, whatever is keeping you from being able to adhere to the directions, let your prescriber and your pharmacist know, and we can try to work around that. In the interest of time, I'm not going to show you this video on barriers to medication adherence because I've already addressed those in the slide prior to that. So now among our VMRC consumers, as I said, one of the most common reasons is failure for non-adherence is failure to get the refills. Two things that you can do. One is you can see about whether or not the pharmacy has an auto refill program. My wife and I actually have automatic refills at our pharmacy, and they text us when we're ready. I don't have to remember to tell him, oh, I'm running out of this medication. They know because they've given me, in my case, I buy a 90-day supply, and they know somewhere around day 80, they need to get that refill ready, and they will text me and they will say your refill is ready. And that gives them also plenty of time to call my physician if there's no refills left on the prescription. The other thing we can do is, as caregivers for our consumers, is to simply watch how much they have left in their bottles and make a notation when it's running low that someone needs to contact the pharmacy and get that refill in process. Now, if it's an issue of forgetting to take medications, things like medication calendars, little boxes for the medications that are divided by days of the week or whatever. Some are even larger. Some of the bubble packs have maybe 30 days worth in them and got the date on there. So working within the facility and looking over what's going on with the consumer's prescriptions is a good way to keep up on the refill issue. So that is it for today. If you want to get credit for this, you're going to want to email Lorraine Rodriguez at VMRC. She will send you a copy of the quiz. You can take it in any way you want. You can put the answers in your email. You can print it, do your answers, scan it, and send it back. Lorraine is very flexible on that, and then she will send you the certificate. And then if you have any questions, you can always email me. I'm under pharmacist@vmrc.net. and I can help you with that. So with that, we'll end the presentation today. And again, thank you so much for attending.
Thank you, Bill.
Thanks, Lorraine.